Okay, and we're COMP308, and it's week 8, lesson 8, part 2. And again, we're probably going to have a 4-part lesson this week in terms of videos. So we just finished installing brackets. I talked about getting on Heroku and so on. Hey, how about if I want to, we've done all this stuff, but we haven't mentioned really GitHub. How does all this GitHub stuff fit? Well, guess what? We're going to do GitHub command line now, right? So yeah, we were doing GitHub with our little tool. And by the way, you still could do it with your little app that comes with Windows or Mac. But the great thing about GitHub is, first of all, let's do this. Let's go git on the command line here, right? And I'll say ---- version. See if that works. My version is 2.1.3.36 on the Mac side. On the PC side, if I could do the same thing, I'm just going to kill brackets here on the PC side. I'm going to go into command line and go again, git ---- version, right? And it should give me approximately like mine is 1.9.5, whatever on the PC side. So I think my Mac side has a little bit of a later version than the PC. It's fine. What's your version? Do you have a version? If you haven't installed git command, you can actually, there's a git shell that you can download. But let's go to kind of install git. Let's try and do that. So I'll say install git, right? And if I go to git installing git, here's how we can do that. We can use on the Linux machines, it looks like this. On Mac, it looks like this. And on the Windows PC, we kind of, there's an actual link for installing Git. We can go to this git.scm.com download win, and we get this, and all of a sudden it kind of downloads this. And if you notice, I've already got the 1.9.5. I'm not going to reinstall it here, but this is the one you want. So it's called git-scm.com/download/win. Okay, so that's the Git version on your PC. That's local command line tools that you'll be downloading. Let me know when you guys have done that. And why are we doing this? Because everything we do from now on is going to be command line, guys. So there's no point using Git the way we've been traditionally using. We'll still use GitHub because we still need to kind of create a repository out there. It's easier for us to do it that way. But when we set up our commits, when we do all of our processes from now on, everything will be via the command line. So you'll be like Git savants after we're done this, right? And so every time we do an update, we do things with Git from now on. And I'll let you guys. Are you guys installed already?
This has select. Just leave it as default.
Yeah, leave it as default. So when you download and install Git, just leave it as is. Right? Don't you worry about it. As long as it runs in the command line, you're good to go. Hopefully it won't ask you for a reboot. Oh yeah, here we go.
I'll choose the options. This base.
It says you actually should use Git from the Windows command prompt. That's the option you want. Right?
Like this.
And then the next one would be
Style.
check out leave the first one in place. Yeah, press next.
I want to cross.
All right. Okay, so when you get there, again, I'm at the command prompt, and on the Windows side of the house, right? If I have a file, first of all, let's go back to creating something on the Windows side. So I've got a couple of folders that I've kind of created as test folders. Let's make another one. You guys made a new folder called Node Demo. I'm going to do the same thing here on the Windows side, Node Demo. Now, if I want to kind of get into that folder, the fastest way to do that is to go CD space and then kind of drag and drop this thing in here, right? You can do that on the Windows side too. So let me just show you, and now I'm in that folder, right? I'll show you that again. Yeah? I'll pull it up again. Here's my command prompt. It shows me I'm in Visual Studio 12. You might be in someplace else. You just have to type cd space, so that's change directory, that's what it stands for. And then if I take my node demo, take a look over here. Here's my folder, and if I drag and drop it into here, right, it'll redirect me into the proper folder. So we need to be in that folder, right? Okay, so there's my node demo folder right here, right? Okay, in order for me to initiate or initialize this folder as a Git repository, right? I've got to do this. I got to say Git. Are you guys ready with Git yet? Init. If I do that, it says initialized empty Git repository in C users Tom, my name, desktop node demo.git. You guys done that? Okay, that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing we need to do is if I go into my folder here, now you guys have a folder with other things now, but if you guys go into this folder, and I'm going to drag and drop from my other side in a second, right, because I can do that. In this folder, what you need to do is, we never did this before with Visual Studio, but here I want you to create something called a git ignore file, right? So we're going to right click and we're going to say on the Windows side, we're going to say new, and we're going to call it new file. We're going to make a new text file. Now you may have to change your folder preferences so you can see different extensions here. Like so they're not text file extensions, that they're actually, you can see the whole extension like this, right? You need to do that in your preferences, right? So if you don't, like see right now, you might see just new text file with no extension. Do you see that? Are you doing it with me?
I'm just starting.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. So if you see this, if you don't see the .txt extension, you need to go into Control Panel, and in Control Panel you'll see a. Are you moving computers? You're taking off. Go. In the Control Panel, what you want to do is you want to go to this Folder Options menu right here. And under the Folder Options menu on Windows, what you want to go is you want to hit View. And then inside the View, you want to say, I kind of show hidden files, folders, and drives. I want to put that into play. And I also want to unhide or uncheck the hide extensions for known file types, like for TXT. Otherwise, you won't see your TXT extension. So you need to do that in Windows in order for us to see your extension. For developers, this is okay. For the regular, run-of-the-mill user, don't recommend. And I wouldn't recommend if you go to friends' houses and you do this, it's bad. You don't want them to know the extension, right? They just used Windows for surfing the net and getting email, most of them, right? And maybe checking Facebook, and that's about it. But for you guys are developers, so again, it's important for us to show hidden files, folders, and drives. We're going to get this through our Folder Options app here in the Control Panel, right, of Windows, right? And then in there, we're going to uncheck the Hide Extensions for Known File Types option. Okay, once we've done that, then you can see in my Node Demo folder where it says New Text Document, I'm going to rename this thing, right, by kind of clicking on it one time, getting rid of the .text extension and making something called a git ignore file. Git ignore, and it says, hey, you must have a file type, right? You must type a file type. Well, this is my file type. And you'll frequently get this kind of issue, right, going on because it doesn't understand what a git ignore file is. If you notice, this is a git file, and my git ignore file should be right in here too. If you don't install a git ignore file, it's bad, right? So how do we do that? How do we change this text document to a git ignore file? Well, you can use brackets. So I go into brackets, and if you notice right now, I'm looking at the wrong folder. I can simply pull my node folder. I'm just going to minimize this for a second. Pull my node folder in here like I did last time, and now I see this the wrong thing. That's what I see. I see the wrong thing. It's not the node folder I want. It's the node demo folder, right? Because I've got a couple of different folders here. There we go. I got my node folder, and I've got this new text document, which I'm going to rename, right, to a git ignore. Okay, once I've done that, of course, it accepts it in brackets. In my .git ignore, I've got to position things in here that I want Git to ignore. That's what I want it. Instead of sending things out into on GitHub, if we don't include this git ignore file, it'll send everything to GitHub, including all of our node modules. Our node modules can be like 70,000 files. We don't want to do that with GitHub every single time. It just takes too bloody long. So we want to put in here node modules. Node module is one thing we're going to put in here. And I'll explain what that is later on. Just for now, what I want you to think is, if you say node modules, it should be node modules actually, not node module. If I look at node, my example node, see how it looks, node modules? I want to have that as something that I ignore. Node modules. The other one that I want you to put in, even though you don't need to, is you're going to be sharing your files across both Windows and Mac, right? So what we want to do is there's this DS store we also want to ignore. And if I go back into on the Mac side, and if I do an ls command on the Mac side, if I do ls -al, right, I get this long list of directories. On the PC side, by the way, you won't need to do this. But if you notice, Mac includes this .ds_store file, which talks about our file structure and directory structure. You want to probably ignore that too, just in case you're on a Mac or some other kind of system. This is kind of something that is, if you notice, about best practices for us to ignore. So I'm going to kind of take this, I'm going to copy this DS store, and I'm going to kind of ignore that too, right? So I want to ignore node modules, anything in node modules, and anything in DS store, okay? That's what my git ignore does. And by the way, we're going to add additional things to ignore later on. Like, for example, what if you don't want to put all of your copyrighted images on the web inside your open source Git folder, right? Because you don't have a protected or private repo that's on GitHub. Well, you don't have to put all your images up there. You can use GitHub as a repository for your files and not your images, right? But you can put your image path in here, right? So anything you don't want to share on GitHub, you can put in here, and it'll ignore those things. Okay, cool. So we've set up the git ignore file, and now what I want to do is I'm going to just kind of match up my my node demo project. Here's my node demo project. I want to match it up with yours because I got it on the Mac side. I want to match it on the PC side. So I'm just going to kind of go into my node demo project, which is right here, and I'm just going to grab all this stuff, copy it. Hopefully this will work, and then maybe go into my folder here and see if it works. Paste, yeah. Right, so now I've got my stuff is kind of very similar to what your stuff looks like, and if you notice on my brackets, it shows me my update. So if I go into index.html, I've got my basic index.html. All that stuff is here. Now I want to create my repository here, so we're going to do a node demo repository on GitHub, okay? But before you do that, let's go back into command line. Here's my command line. So I've got my, you have to do this git init within your folder to initialize your repository. So you guys all done that? Git init? Okay. The other thing we do is we can do another command we have to always do, or frequently we use, is something called Git Status. And if you notice, it says right now on the branch, we have an initial commit. We have these untracked files, right? This git ignore, CSS, index.html, and JS file, right? And it says nothing added to commit, but untracked files present. Use git add to track. Okay? So the next piece we need to do is to add all these to something called the staging area of Git, right? So we're going to go git add, and if I use space and dot, that means I want to add all my files, right? So I want to git add dot, and then it adds all these files. It says warning, LF will be replaced by CRLF, and CSS, da da da. Yeah, it's all these warnings. Don't worry about that. If I do a git status now, I notice that these have all been committed to my staging area, right? This is my staging area. So these are the things I'm going to commit. I've just added them into things that I want to track, right? Okay, cool, cool. Now I've got to make a commit, right? Remember, like we did a commit in Visual Studio, we got to commit here too. So we're going to go git commit -m, right? And then what it's going to be called. So let's say created demo project structure, right? In brackets, in quotations. And what that does is it adds all these things into our commit. So let's take a look at our status now. Git status, and it shows us that on branch master, nothing to commit because we've committed all of our changes. Okay? Now we need to finally set up our Git repo online. Let's do that. So we're going to go into our Chrome. I'm going to go to GitHub. It's going to take me to my GitHub account. It's going to take you to yours. I'm going to go and create a new repo. Hopefully it's going to be available for me. I'm going to call this Node Demo. Oops. Node Demo. Yeah? Node Demo. And I'm going to create my repository. It's going to give me this Git link, right? But look at what it also gives us here. All the information we need has always been there. We've just been ignoring it, right? That's our own little Git ignore secret, right? We've been ignoring this thing the whole time because we haven't needed it right until now. So if you notice, it says I need to do a couple things. We've done this piece, Git init. We didn't add our README. We'll do that later. We've done our first commit. That's one we've done here. And then we have our Git remote add origin is what we need to do here right now. This piece right here. We can also do it from here. All right. So let's do these two pieces. So this piece and this piece. So I'm going to copy this line here. Right. I'm going to go back into my terminal and paste. Right-click paste. Right. And then press enter. And now my Git repo has been added, right? I just follow I just copy this command and put it into my terminal window, okay? Okay, but before we push to master, there's a couple other things we need to do because if this is the first time you're doing this, you need to kind of establish your username and so on, right? So we can do something like this. Git, and if I'm not wrong, if I just do a git command by itself, right? If I look through this thing, it'll give me a hint of what I need to do here. And as an example, if you notice, there's the version, all these little git hints to use, right? If I want to set up my username, though, right? Because it's going to ask me for my username and password every time, right? And I don't want to do that when I use Git, right? So I want to do something like that, if I can, right? I'll say something like git, and if I'm not wrong, it's --local, right? User.name, and then my name is my name, right? You can put your name in here. Let's see if that's right. No. Let's try git. I think it's one thing, user.name. No. That's just, on the Windows is a little bit different than the Mac. Let's say user.name. Because it might be global anyway automatically on the machine. Yes, it is. Okay, so git username is not a git command. See git help. And I don't think it's going to have that. But what I want to do, it's going to ask me for my name and password the first time. Yeah, it doesn't do here do it on the PC as it does on the Mac. Not a problem. So let's do the next piece. So the next piece is git push -u origin master. Right, this is a good thing to do. So we're going to kind of take this command, copy it, go into terminal, and we're going to put that in there, right-click, paste, and press enter. And now it says, here's my username. That's what I was trying to avoid. Right, so my username is my right, and then it's going to ask me for my password, right, and then press enter. And then what it does is it's going to set that up. It's going to send it up to Git. Just like we normally would do it with GitHub and the app that we're going to use. If I refresh the page now, I'm going to have my CSS, my JavaScript, my git ignore file, which I made, and my index.html, just like we normally would have.
So when we did commit files, it didn't update the GitHub.
We didn't have a connection with GitHub yet, right? And even when we do a local commit. Let's do one more local commit. So I've got this index.html. I've got kind of this example set we put together, right? And I want to add in here, I want to make a change to my index.html file. So let's do that here locally. So I go in here and I say something like, we'll add another div, right? Actually, you know what? We'll do a little bit more bootstrap in here. So we've got this content container in Bootstrap, and what we want to put in here is we want to talk about each content container has its own. It's almost like a row. If you think about row in Foundation, what it does, same kind of idea. We're going to make another div container, and we're going to make it a class of column, right, large 12. We're going to add that in there as a class. And inside column large 12, we're going to take all of these paragraph tags and h1 tags, and we're going to cut this out, and we're going to put it inside that div tag. All right, so there's column large 12. All right, and I'm going to save it. And now, and again, this won't work for me because I've got another server running in the background. Actually, I'll just kill this. I'll kill my WAMP server, and that probably will solve my issues. Might not. Here we go. Hello world. So this is what mine looks like now. Take a look. Right? So this is my live site. My live site's working again, right? Here's my live hello world, right? And I made a change to my index.html page, right? Okay, let's do one more thing here just to see. There's a difference between container and container fluid. If you notice, container has these big spaces on the side here. For regular Bootstrap, this is how it works. Container fluid, what it does, I'm just going to kind of minimize this for a second. It allows us to go right to the edge, right? So if I change this container class to say container-fluid, and if I save, automatically, because I have a live preview, I see that I've got less space here on the side right away, right? So it's instantaneous. This is the great thing about live preview. You just do it, and all of a sudden, boom, you see your changes right away, right? Okay, cool. So we've done this piece, right? This live preview kind of thing. We've made some changes. Hey, now's the time to do an update to GitHub as a test, right? So I'm going to go into my terminal, right? Now, what are the things we need to do? We need to kind of say, let's go Git Status, right? And it says, hey, look what it says, modified index.html, right? Well, what I want to do, just to be safe, is do a git add dot, which adds everything back into the staging area, anything that's changed. Okay, now if you notice, there's only one thing that's changed. If I go Git Status, right, it shows that the only thing that's into my staging area is this index.html file, right? And now I'm going to do a commit, git commit -m updated index.html, right? I press enter. It gives me some feedback, and if I go git status, it shows me that there's nothing to commit because everything is ready to go, right? One more command you need to know is git log. If I go git log, it tells me that these are it shows me the commits that I already have locally, right, in my history. So here's my my commit as an example. Warning, my terminal is not fully functional because I've got it on terminal, not on bash, right? And if you notice here, I've got my a couple of my commits. The first commit I have is created demo project structure, and the second one is updated index.html, right? Okay, I still haven't pushed this thing to GitHub yet.
Do you have to define which repository of GitHub, or does it?
No, it knows the latest. Once I've done the repository once, once I define my remote, it's good.
Yeah. So what if you wanted to do that full command again?
You have to go, if you want to do a new repository, you have to go into a new folder. Each folder has its own Git repository, right? or it's its own Git folder. Okay, so let's go to send this to remote. So I'm going to go git push, right? And I'm just going to go origin, right, master. Git push origin master. Okay, like that. Take a look. And it says, here, this is the thing I wanted to avoid. My username, pain in the ass, right, and my password. And then, boom, it pushes it. And if I go back to GitHub and I refresh, it shows me I've got 2 commits. And now, if I look at my commits, it's the same commits that I have in my command line, right? So again, we've learned how to put together GitHub on command line, and we need to do that because with Heroku, which we're going to be using as a remote service, going forward, we need to understand how to use. We can use Git with Heroku very nicely, right? And we need to use the command line. We need to know basic Git command structure in order for us to do that. Okay, cool. So we've got this Git stuff going on. One thing we're missing is this README file, right? This readme.md, right? What's an MD file stand for anyway? It's called a markdown file. That's what it is, markdown, right? So if I go into my command structure, here I am, and I go to Git Status now, right? If you notice, there's nothing to commit. My working directory is clean. That's what it says, right? Because I've done all my commits. I haven't changed anything. When I set up a Git repository locally, it tracks any changes to any of the files that's inside of there, other than the ones that I've put inside my git ignore file. My git ignore file ignores anything that's inside of there. So if I make changes to my node modules or whatever, it's not going to care, right? Okay, cool. But what I want to do is I want to add this readme file, right? I'm going to do that in brackets. So I'm going to pull up brackets, and I'm going to right click here and go new file. And inside there, I'm going to call it readme, capitals, that's the standard, .md. When I do that, my readme.md file is right here. And if you notice, on the bottom of brackets, it's hard for you guys to see, it says markdown, because it kind of detects what kind of file it is. It's a markdown file, right? The way markdown works is if you put a single pound sign, right, it's like an H1 headline, right? It creates almost like this faux HTML. So I'm going to call this my node demo repo. And then underneath it, I can put some information about what the repo is about. This repo is for demonstration purposes only. It highlights the use of Git on the command line as well as brackets. Okay, cool. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to control save. And when I've done that, of course, right, if I go back down to my folder structure now in my terminal and I go Git Status, it shows me that I got this new README file, right? Detected that I created a new README file, right? And now I'm going to add it to my Git. We'll do one more commit here. I'll go Git, right? Add dot, which adds everything. I can also do a specific file like this, README, right? .add.me. If I want to do one file I want to commit one file, I can do that. But it's safer to do this because we want to maybe have more than one file to commit, right? Git add dot. And then if I go to Git Status, it shows me that I got this one file, this README file that I want to commit. Right? Now I'm going to do my commit. Git commit -m added README file. It does it. And now I'm going to go git push origin master. I'm going to press enter. It's going to ask me for my name and password again, which is a pain in the ass. And we're going to fix that later on. I'll figure out how to do that with you guys. And password, and then it updates it. And this time when I go back into my Git and I refresh, I also have this really cool little README that comes up. right? That's how we do a little README. So we got our README, we got our git ignore file, and our folder structure here. Cool? So we need to know this is all prep work for Node, right? We haven't touched Node. But we need to do all this stuff because if we don't do this stuff, I'm going to do it and you're going to go, but Tom, I don't have that. But Tom, I don't have that. But Tom, I don't have that. And you're going to keep doing that. Tom, I don't have that. Tom, I don't know how to do this. It doesn't work, right? So instead of us doing all these things, this is all my prep work, setting up your environment, if you will, today to get things going. All right, this is cool. Let's continue, right? So we've got this stuff here on the Mac. And by the way, hey, if I want to mirror what I got on the Mac on the PC, I can do that by pulling the repo and cloning the repo from the PC to the Mac. I can do that. Not a problem. I'm not going to do that here, but we could certainly do something like that. So we've covered this idea of the mean stack, Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. And again, just like I mentioned, I want you guys to sign up for some of the ancillary technologies, Mongo Lab, right? I want you to sign up for, take your course, AngularJS, through your this free online course with Code School, right? That for a couple points there. Download and install brackets and use Emmet, use a couple of other extensions that we're using for another point, Lilia's idea. And then let's install things like, so you're signing up for Mongo Lab, you're signing up for Heroku, and you're taking your Angular course and you're downloading and installing brackets. That's 5% I'm giving you for doing these activities. This is all due by next week. Okay, so I'll put that together in one big package, right? In one, instead of like multiple Dropboxes, one Dropbox for all that stuff to get your full points. And I'll give you your how to do a test. There might be a little test that might be a little separate for the Dropbox. So maybe 3% for the Dropbox for the other things, and then 2% for your test, right? Okay, nice and easy. Okay. So, sorry. Really what we want to talk about is this 3-tier web application development stuff. So after we talk about Mongo, Express, Angular, Node, which is mean, right? We want to kind of separate these 3 layers. The data, which is what and we talk MVC, is your thank you. Your model will take care of the data. Your views is the presentation, and your controller is the logic. Really, that's what we're talking about with MVC. And how does this thing look anyway? Well, your model handles data manipulation. It basically handles communication with almost like if you want to talk about database adapters, all that stuff happens in the model. The view is the visual part that basically takes care of all the stuff we saw, the index.html file, your CSS. That's all part of the view. And Angular kind of has a place in there in terms of how we separate views, and we're going to use Express to do that. And the controller piece is all your JavaScript stuff that we're going to use to create our, to bind events inside of our pages. And this is really what this model view controller would look like in a nutshell. So the user, right, he uses the controller, right, because the controller itself is this, he's going to have an interface to use, right? And then usually sometimes what happens is the first thing that the user uses is this view controller. That's why sometimes on the Apple world, if you build Apple apps, if you will, iOS apps or Cocoa apps, you're going to see that it's called a view controller because you see an interface and you use the interface to control the logic in the background, to manipulate the data in the background, which further updates the view. This is what this 3-tier application framework looks like in a nutshell. So again, knowing that Mongo mean stands for those things, those pieces, and I want to say them over and over again, Mongo, Express, Angular, Node, so you know what mean stands for. We haven't used it yet. But it's really, the idea behind it is using this single language for this application architecture and using JSON objects. So actually it's called JavaScript object notation, making objects with that thing to create this database, a NoSQL database. And this is what it would look like when we're using all this piece parts. So here's another little diagram. You've got your client that uses Angular, right, as an example. He makes the request. He goes through the Node server, which parses the request. Then the Express.js platform, if you will, or the framework, the web framework, routes the request. It sends the request into the MongoDB database, retrieves the data back into Express, through the Node server, out through Angular, which wraps it up and serves it to you, the view and everything else, and then sends it back to the client. That's the round trip that's happening with when we use the mean stack. Okay, so it's a really cool little application framework, and it really enables us to make a scalable architecture for our apps as opposed to one big file, or where our file gets really messy. Because one of the things that JavaScript is known for is this whole spaghetti coding, right? You look at it, it's like, oh my God, it looks like spaghetti code. It doesn't look like anything. Like you look at C#, there's some structure to it. Java, structure. C++, okay, maybe not so much structure. Structure, right? And so on, right? But JavaScript, you look at it, there's no structure. It looks like spaghetti, right? Well, some of this helps us to kind of separate our logic from our view, from our data. So again, way back in the day, as a prefix to what Node is, Chrome developed this new V8 engine, JavaScript engine in 2008, right? And from the V8 engine came Node. Because what ends up happening is V8 engine sped up JavaScript. That JavaScript back in the day was not so fast, right? As it is now with Chrome, right? And then once they did that, they had this idea of creating this non-blocking socket in JavaScript. Because remember how JavaScript works. If you put a JavaScript file at the top of your that links to the top of your file, what happens? It has to execute the JavaScript file before it runs the rest of the file, right? Before you go into the rest of the HTML file, you have to run this JavaScript file first. Well, that's called blocking, right? Because it blocks you from running the rest of your file, right? But these people were thinking about this way of creating something called a non-blocking socket that doesn't block you from running the rest of your files. And that's what Node is all about. It uses non-blocking architecture, JavaScript architecture, when it runs in the back end. So again, when we think about JavaScript being event-driven, everything you do with JavaScript it's an event-driven language, right? Node takes advantage of that because everything that we do with Node is event-driven. Like for example, we make a Node server, it's listening for someone going on to port 3000 as an example, when we created that Node server last week, right? So that is an event that's driving how Node routes our requests for the user. So the user makes a request, I want to see a web page, Tom, right? Let's say I'm the server, right? He makes a request. We're listening for any requests. And then we're listening for what kind of request he's making, the user. And then what we're going to do is we're going to redirect him or route him into the proper place in our website by listening to his request, right? So this is the event-driven kind of nature of Node. And we talked about NPM a little bit last week, but let's say we can't really do a Node, we can't use Node at all unless we use something called, really, in any ways, and unless we use something called NPM. NPM is our package manager. So if we go back to our folder here, right, for Node, this is our Node demo. We haven't done any Node yet. There's a command we can put in. If I go Node by itself and press Enter, it gives me this command line. Like if you notice, there's almost like this mini command interface for Node. I'm going to Control C out of that, right? And Control C again, right? Control C is going to be our friend when it comes to entering and exiting Node, all right? If I go Node init, right, it's going to say, hey, what the hell is that, right? But npm init, if I go npm init, it's going to say, hey, I want to create something called my new package.json file that I'm adding into my to the root of my folder, right? And my package.json file, what it is it describes all of my Node application dependencies, Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. So node, or sorry, npm init, right? So node package manager init is what it stands for. Okay, cool. And if you notice, it gives me this name. So right now my little folder is called node demo. So I'm just going to use that same thing here, node demo, right, for the name of my app. Okay, cool. The next thing is the version. And we talked about versioning last week, and I like to start my versions with 0.0.1. So 0.0.1. Enter. Description from my app. So this is a demo app for Node. Enter. My entry point, index.js. We don't have that file yet, but we'll put that together. Enter. We can also call it app.js or anything else you like. Okay, my test command. I'm going to press enter. There's no test commands right now. And here's my Git repository. Look, it picked it up, right? It understands my Git repository because I've already set up a Git file. It knows my Git repository is this. This is good. I'm going to press enter. Keywords, I'm not going to use anything there. My author, that's me. If I can spell my name. Even I have trouble. And license, right, we'll leave it as ISC. All right, cool. It says, do you want to accept this file, this package.json file, the way it's been written, as something we want to accept for our files? Well, so I'm going to say yes. When I've done that, if you go back to brackets, look, I've got my package.json file right here. It's all part of brackets, all ready for us. And it is in a JSON format, right? Okay, so this is one part of it. Now I also I'm missing an index.js file, which should probably go right here. So I'm going to kind of do that. I'm going to right click, new file, and I'm going to go index.js. Here's my index.js file. And if you remember, we went to Node last week to create our little Node server. I went to node.js.org. And inside there, I have a really little piece here. I'm just going to make this a little larger so you guys can see. I'll do this again for you. And if you notice, this right here is all we need to set up our server at a certain point. So if I go here, grab all this, right-click, copy, go back into my brackets, right, and paste, Control-V. And if you notice here, what I'm getting is HTTP, I'm creating a variable. The first step here to understand this is I'm creating a variable called HTTP. I'm going to use the require built-in command with Node, right, to require the HTTP service, which is built in, right, to the core of Node. And then I'm going to use the create server method that's built into the HTTP request. And I'm using an anonymous function. You're going to see a lot of these. So if you're not comfortable with anonymous functions, snap to people, right? Function, anonymous function, here it is, an unnamed function with two variables, a request and a response. Our REQ is a request, RES is a response, and what we're doing here is we're responding with a write head. 200 is the code for our response type. The content type is text plain, and our response end is we're actually going to put out a hello world. We're going to listen on port 1337, and it says 127.0.0.1, which is localhost. You can actually take that out. You don't need that. And we have a console.log that says server running at 127.0.0.1, just to give the user an idea of where it is. Okay, so I'm going to kind of hit save, right? I'm going to just ignore these .lint problems for a second, right? And I hit save, and if you notice, it's all saved up right now, right? Okay, so let's try that out. So if I go to my console now and press directory, dir for directory, right? You should see this. Should be something that you see if you press dir in your console command, right? Your git ignore file. Sorry?
Can you go back to the file?
How's that?
Also, can you go back to the command prompt for a second?
Right here.
Oh, it is? Oh.
Want to come up here? This is the stuff. This is what mine looks like, right? And then that's what if you look what this is generated by npm init, right? And if you notice, my package JSON file looks exactly the same now. And I'm creating my index.js file, which I've just got from Node. I didn't do anything. right? And here's my command prompt in here. So my command prompt is showing a directory. I just did a dir command, directory command, that pulls up my directory structure, right? You guys should see this? Okay. Okay, cool. So I want to run this thing. Well, all I have to do is go node index.js, and now I'm running the server at 1337. So if I go to localhost, if I go back up here, and I go to localhost, localhost 1337, and press enter, it's going to say hello world. Right? That's what you should get if you're running Node properly. So now it's listening for any command, any kind of response. And if I go back to my terminal, it shows me that my server is still running. For me to stop running my server, we're going to have to do this over and over again. I got to press Control-C. Okay? Control-C is your friend, in and out of the server. Anytime we make changes to the server, Control-C. When we go back to the server, Control-C. Anytime we do anything else, we have to run it again. So if I want to run it again, I'm going to issue this other command again. All right? And you can do that by stepping up with your arrow keys on the terminal. Okay, cool. We've done our little server. We've updated things. Hey, guess what? We need to do another commit. Let's try one more commit here. So I'm going to go Git Status. Let's take a look. We add a couple of files here. We're going to go git add dot, right? And we're going to go git commit -m, and we're going to say added node server to project, right? That's cool, cool. We did that. And now we're going to go git push, right? Origin master, and press enter. And now, of course, it's going to ask me my silly username again. And my password. And when it does that, if I go back to my Git repo and I refresh, then I have 4 commits. And if you notice, I have my node information in here as well. So I want to stop here for today, but I want to go back to this because we're going to continue with this stuff here. So let's recap to what we've learned. I'm going to put together this Dropbox for you for tomorrow. We've learned that Node doesn't live on its own, right? Node is a platform, and in order for you to make Node functional more than just the raw platform itself, you need to use NPM, Node Package Manager, right? What that does is it adds extensions or plugins to our Node platform in order for us to have additional functionality. Right now, all we've done is use the npm init function to create our first node server, or second node server if you count last week. So that's what Node is. When we talk mean, as a recap, we're talking about Mongo, Express, right, Angular, and Node. Those are the 4 pieces of the mean framework, if you will, right? The mean stack. But there are other little ancillary pieces we need to know. For example, when we use Mongo, we're going to need to know we're going to need to use something called Mongoose, right? Mongoose is almost like our database adapter for Mongo, right? So even though we're using Mongo, we still need another piece, another module called Mongoose. So one more thing before we stop. If I want to add in dependencies in here, right, into my, for example, I want to install Express. We're going to do that for next day. Let's do an Express install together. So I'm going to go back into my terminal and go do this. npm space install, and we want to add this as a dependency for our application. So we're going to go npm install --save -e for EJS. That's the templating engine I want to use for Express, and then Express, and press enter. What this does is it grabs Express from the Node Package Manager, goes out to the web, grabs Express, and installs it inside of our module. Right? So the command I used was npm install --save -e for EJS templating engine Express. And if you notice, I got all these piece parts. Look at all these modules. These are all dependency modules for Express. All right? Now that I've done that, let's take a look at my directory structure. Look, I've got this node modules folder. If I go into there, node modules, and press directory in there, I've got Express. And if I'm going to go into there, and I go, directory, I've got a whole other node modules module, right? And I've got all these modules. And if I go into something like, for example, debug, and I go directory, I've got this. And if I go in there, I got more node modules. And if I go in there, you get my picture there. So that's why we don't include node modules in the GitHub. It's crazy, because I just did one installation. It probably added like 10,000 files, right? So let's go skip back out.
Will it still work if we
Oh, yeah.
include it? If we don't include it?
Yeah, well, because we're only saving it up on GitHub, but when we want to, now that I've added it as a dependency, it's going to be part of our project. So if I ever want to install this somewhere else, I can go npm install locally, and what it'll do is it'll look to see if I've got all my modules, my dependencies for my project. One more thing. So that's Express. And now I've added it as a dependency. Well, let's take a look at brackets really quickly. Well, if I look at brackets in my package.json file, take a look. Now I've got, under dependencies, I've got Express. At least, this little caret says at least at version 4.12.2 that I need as part of my package. Right? All right, well, we did that. One more thing before we, I know we're kind of running late, but at the end of the day, let's do one more commit for more practice, right? I'm going to get git, right? Let's see if it does this. Add dot, right? Cool, git, right? Commit, that's what we're going to do. -m added express module as dependency. If I spelled that right, I'm not sure if I did. And then git push origin master. And then my silly username and password. Once I've done that, if I go git log, I've got these commits here in my log, right? And if I look up online in Git, I've got all of these things in here as well. Right, so I've got an updated package.json file with my latest dependency. What the dependency does is if I remove my node modules folder and then go npm install, it installs all that again. Try it. Delete your node modules folder like this through the folder section. So I go here, right click, delete, right? I've deleted my node modules folder and now I want to put it back. I go back into command line, right? Yeah. If I go back into command line, let's run this again. Hold on a second. So I'm deep inside the Git command shell. And again, if I want to go to good. And if I go in my command shell, I go npm install. Now it'll look through my package.json file and install my stuff back. That's why we don't put it on Git, because we don't need to. So you can always go, when we download and install a project, the first thing we do is we go into that folder and go npm install, and it installs all our dependencies. Okay, so that's it for me today.